to Out of the Ground, Reading the Book of Dust by Philip Pullman. This is Wesley Shantz. It's been a little while, but we're back at last with episode 8 in the series, A Far-Off Feeling. This will cover chapters 10 and 11 in La Belle Sauvage. Chapter 10, Lord Asriel, and 11 is called Environmental Protection in the US edition, but it's called Three Legs in the UK edition, or at least the audio version. Now, around this time, a month or two ago, I was talking about a couple of chunks of this book at once, and I think I was getting a little bit negative about it. And maybe I wasn't as careful as I ought to have been, because immediately upon posting those, I thought to myself, oh, this idea of the League of St. Alexander has got to be some kind of reflection on Pullman's part of the Catholic League that tried to boycott and successfully boycotted his film in the States when the Golden Compass movie came out. And so, speaking of changes of titles between different editions, that Northern Lights being its proper name, and then the Golden Compass being what it's called in the US release, and then what it gets called later in the film release as a result. There is a pretty close connection here from those chapters that we covered last time, which were mostly about Malcolm at school, insofar as now we see him out of school and in his own environment once again at the Trout and the Priory. The connection is in the form of this tool of the drill that works to put together his idea about the screw that can't be unscrewed with the idea of the anti-clockwise or counterclockwise direction of opening the acorn. And so this brings us back. We're situated here with Malcolm and Mr. Taphouse once again. And the older carpenter and handyman is impressed with Malcolm figuring this out. He's so impressed that he says, they won't get in now, Malcolm, as if he'd thought of the idea himself. And this pronoun without a referent brings us around to this grammar question, as always, and a new vocabulary word of the day, malefactors. That is, evildoers. He asks, don't they teach you anything in school, right? Of course, this idea, although Malcolm had it independently, is something that he properly was able to put into practice because of his teacher at school giving him the tools. This is also possibly another one of Pullman's subtle digs at C.S. Lewis, where Lewis has his professorial character say something like, don't they teach you anything? It's all in Plato. It's all in Plato. And of course, Pullman is a very non-Platonic sort of thinker in many ways. That is, he doesn't only emphasize the spiritual, but very much the sensual and bodily experience of being human. But it's interesting that in this conversation, we do get allusions to what Pullman will call the secret commonwealth. That is, the uncanny, even spiritual sorts of beings. As Mr. Taphouse says, there's spiritual evil as well. And it'll take more than an oak shutter to keep that out. Now, ghosts are the least of it, he says. Night ghasts, specters, now apparitions. There's a rich connection here and a lineage to the original series. In his Dark Materials, Billy Costa, or sorry, is it Tony or Billy? Is his name Tony? Tony Costa, yeah, because Billy's the one who gets kidnapped, I'm pretty sure. The older Costa brother, anyway, is telling Lyra stories about the dangers that they will face in the north, and he alludes to a variety of otherworldly, uncanny monsters and apparitions. And of course, in The Subtle Knife, the second book, we do meet beings properly called specters, those who can absorb and consume the demon or soul of the humans that they encounter once those demons are fixed, once those humans are adult. Um, so Lyra herself, early in the Golden Compass, also sees night ghasts that come to her. There's a conversation I had, and I was trying to re-listen to it years ago now, with Dr. Gabriel Schenk at Signum University and Oxford. And he was arguing that those night ghasts are more than just a nightmare. They're, in many ways, in some sense, perhaps the first real close-up encounter we have with this idea that Pullman comes to develop in the second book of the Book of Dust much later as the Secret Commonwealth, taking that title, of course, from Kirk, the book about elves, fauns, and fairies. I was looking at that actually, though, because we also were talking about this graveyard that appears in a scene where Will and Lyra are at the top of a belvedere in Shedigatsi. They attempt to cut through, but they're high above the ground, and they can see that they're north of Oxford, north of the hornbeam trees where Will comes through, and they can see a cemetery, a graveyard. Now, I'm pretty sure that this is a different one. There's a larger Wolvercott cemetery, and then there's a smaller graveyard that Mr. Taphouse is talking about here, because he mentions that it's at St. Peter's. And St. Peter's is, in our world anyhow, a church that's a bit south of the big graveyard, the big cemetery. He's talking about the 3 times he's seen ghosts. Once there at the graveyard at St. Peter's, once in the old jail when he was working. And he goes on and tells this story, painting the picture of it. It was a winter's day. This grismal daylight, gray light came in. The platform that he saw turned out to be the trap door that banged open and revealed a dead man hanging from a rope. It was the scaffold where they executed prisoners. In his telling, he prays like fury, falling to his knees, but his demon clarifies that actually he fainted clean away. And maybe this again is a bit of a dig at religiosity and piety on Pullman's part, that it's simply motivated by fear and not deep, true faith. But the demon fell off the sawhorse, and that's how he knows that that was the truth of the matter. But this is not to dismiss what he saw. In fact, it's to certify or ratify the reality of it, that his demon was terrified as well. And the wood, Malcolm Ever Practical asks about it, they had to burn because it was too soaked in misery. So again, the way in which dust is attracted to objects of human intention, here we see that something else, or some quality like that, called misery, right, attracted to these evil actions that human beings perpetrate against one another, and the sorrow. This is something that the voice of Bonneville will be whispering to Malcolm about in the basement of the House of Lord Murderer a few chapters ahead. And the third ghost, of course, the rule of 3 here comes in big. It's right where you're standing, and it was horrible. It was indescribable. So the terror of that moment turned Mr. Taphouse, his hair white. He's not 70. As Malcolm says politely, knowing that he's past his 75th birthday, he's 39 years old. Malcolm is half sure that he's joking, and he says he won't tell him anymore if he doesn't believe him. So again, this idea that belief is more about the sort of story that one tells, to process, to deal with, to make light of, to pass on traditions about deep feelings, misery, evil doing, or perhaps fear. So this is a delightful interaction. I think it's better in its way than the previous 2 chapters combined, and I'm glad that we're out of school for a while here. So as Pullman says in many places, one of the best things that you can do as a storyteller if you're stuck is to have a man come through the door with a gun. This is apparently something Raymond Chandler says in one of his talks. And sure enough, in this case, it's not a man coming through the door with a gun, but the next best thing, it's Sister Fenella knocking furiously at the door, coming in breathless, looking like she might faint herself. And Mr. Taphouse doesn't have a gun handy, but he grabs a hammer anyway and follows her out to see what the problem is. Now, Malcolm, again, primed for fear, he feels his skin prickle, and I think the reader also feels the emotion finally picking up a bit here. Maybe, if we want to be generous to Pullman, the dullness of the previous chapters is in its own way setting us up for the full effect of this moment where the rising action properly gets going, I would say. We have the secret commonwealth introduced in a sense. We have now some inciting incidents. We've laid the groundwork. We've got Lyra in her location, where we've got Malcolm and the other characters that we need so far introduced, Dame Hannah, and now we're finally able to get something to happen. And it comes in the form of the nuns, specifically Sister Benedicta, with Mr. Taphouse there as insurance, standing up to these men who have come to take the child away. This is a clear inversion of the three men that were the initial kind of beginning of the story, right? The three men visiting at the Trout, who Malcolm met. These men are impolite. They don't even take their hats off. They claim to have an authority that they clearly lack, because Sister Fenella, with the true authority of her office and the proper kind of power invested in her through the true belief of the nuns and of true believers like Pullman's grandfather say, she stands up to them and proves that they have no business taking this child away from them. So some interesting details here. Sister Fenella is unable to tell them what's happened, right? So they have to see for themselves. So there's an instance here of the power of storytelling failing, right? When fear becomes too much, when the action is too in the moment, the story is inadequate. We have to go and we have to act, indeed. The men say they're police. They're lying, right? So again, the idea of a false authority, or rather they look like police. They say they are from an office of child protection, one that Sister Benedicta does not recognize. And then they clarify that they are from the Consistorial Court of Discipline. But as she says, her own job protecting people at the at this holy building is not going to be trumped so lightly. She looks again at the warrant and throws it into the fire. So again, this inversion of Mrs. Coulter's action with the letters of the children that she has inveigled, stolen away from wherever they were living in the back streets around London and elsewhere. In this case, it is a proper disdain, and one that is open and overt, not something hidden. She calls them bullies in uniform. She appeals to the 800 years that this place has stood for hospitality and taking care of others, serving those in need. Her fierce speech, as it's called here, I'm not sure if I'm quoting that or if I just wrote that as my notes, I'm sorry. But anyway, this is a clear reference at the very end of the Book of Dust in the Rose Field. We see Lyra in a position very similar where she is attempting to stand up to false authorities and is unable to quite call upon the reserves of true confidence and persuasiveness that Malcolm is able to remember in that moment 20 years later, this moment with Sister Benedicta. So Pullman refers directly back to this at that time, and I sort of wonder if he has a particular instance in mind from his own youth, something that he saw like this. She tells them to pray to the good Lord for forgiveness for what they have done, waving guns in the face of the least well of the nuns, Sister Fenella herself. And then they finally leave, flanked by this guard of dishonor of the other nuns who flood in to the room. That term can't be accidental, right? The flood is coming. And this is a kind of a flood of goodness that precedes it. Lyra is preening as if she's done something splendid. This is a lot like that sign above the inn or the tavern of Malcolm's uncle, where the Belle Sauvage got its name. Um, and we see that this all comes back to that word malefactors, because that's what those men were. Um, they sweep up to stop the spontaneous combustion, to bring back another vocab term. Um, Now, in the fallout from this moment, it's Malcolm who's telling the story to his mother, um, and she is similarly unaware of any place called the Office of Child Protection. But there's someone else overhearing this interaction, someone who has yet to see and hold Lyra, as both Malcolm and his mother have by this time. Um, Someone who knows well enough, though, about these malefactors, this new word that keeps getting brought up. Um, so maybe it's partly because Malcolm tells this story right away that it fixes in his memory in this way, that he associates it with this idea of the enemy, the evildoers. Um, but the person overhearing, of course, is Alice. And as usual, they are pointedly ignoring one another. So it's made all the more apparent that they are listening carefully, because it's so ostentatious that they are not. Um, when Malcolm's mother goes down to fetch something, presumably the cordial that she's going to bring over to Fenella, um, Alice's demon growls, and she says that she knows what that office is, and her word for it is not malefactors. Her word is bastards. So we don't know much about Alice's family. We hear later that she does have two younger sisters, um, presumably either her own family or one that she knows nearby was oppressed and perhaps broken up indeed by this Office of Child Protection, so-called. Um, for now, they resume their mutual silence, but this is clearly an important moment in which that distinction, that division between Malcolm's family and Alice, who works for them, is beginning to break down, and that's going to continue to bring her more into the story. She's, in a way, the last really important key piece that we've yet to introduce. They have a really interesting little moment here where instead of doing homework, or not just merely doing homework, again, something from school is brought on for a rather spectacularly uncanny sort of occurrence, because it's as Malcolm is looking at his homework about the principal rivers, and there's more than he thought there were, of England. And he's thinking about whether he could paddle across the channel, if he could go on this adventure that he's been dreaming of. He starts to see something between the dividers he's using to measure. At first he thinks it's something on the page, but it begins to flicker and grow and move. He sees it when his eyes are closed too, so it's not there. It's not that his dividers are in the way of something, or that the print is too small. It's that there's something in his own mind that is blocking his vision, or rather, it is communicating a different sort of vision to him. And Asta can't see it, but she can feel it. And it's her words that give me the title for today's episode. It's a far-off feeling, a sense perhaps that she's far away from him, or it may be that they're both far away from the normal world, from where they have always been up till now. This is perhaps a bit of foreshadowing that they will be able to achieve that power of separation, however desperately and dangerously they earn it. And as she describes it, she's not afraid, just calm. So there's this distinction, I think, between this dominant passion or feeling of fear on the one hand, confidence on the other, so the fear of ghosts and of death, perhaps, not staying within its boundaries that Mr. Taphouse is talking about, and then the fear of the nuns over against the confidence that Benedicta has as she stands up to the men who are trying to take away Lyra. Between that, or on a different axis perhaps entirely, there's this idea of the far-off feeling, of calmness, of this sort of vision that takes place in one's mind, that gets bigger and bigger, closer and closer. It makes one sort of dizzy, but then gradually slides away outside of the peripheral vision and beyond. It takes about 20 minutes for this to happen, he says, and once it's gone, they talk about it. He wasn't going blind, but that it was strange all the same. They think of the lines of a hymn, the spangled moon, the horned moon at night with her spangled sisters bright. In this hymn, it turns out, is a setting of Psalm 136 by none other than John Milton. I have been searching, but without much success, to find a good setting of this, or rather recording of this on YouTube. I'll keep trying. But at any rate, it is telling that this far-off feeling, when they don't have other words to capture it, they appeal to the same thing that Mr. Taphouse appealed to, which was prayer, although he actually fainted. The same thing that Sister Benedicta appealed to, right? In contrast to the court's authority, which is garbed in the vestments of the church, but actually very contrary to its deeper purpose and meaning. She also appeals to her faith and to the tradition that her order represents at that place, that holy place where they stand. In the same way, Malcolm's mind goes to the hymn. Of course, it's a hymn that gives us the name Lyra in the first place. So they say some things about this experience, that it was not outside them, but inside, and no less real for that. And again, this is very important for the kinds of themes of this book overall. As Pullman says, if his first series was about innocence and experience, this series of books, The Book of Dust, is about vision. He says this in, I think, the Blake lecture, Blake Society lecture. And he says there that he also, and maybe in some other places too, he also has these auras, these migraine auras, are something he experiences. It can cause a debilitating headache for some people. For Malcolm, there's no headache, just that dizziness and that feeling that it must mean something. This connects very closely with the themes of Lyra's Oxford as well. This idea that everything in nature and in human nature must have a meaning if we can only understand it. So that's where they are at, the same sort of place that Lyra finds herself in Lyra's Oxford, talking with her demon as Malcolm and Asta are talking about whether this experience has meaning and insisting that it must. So at this point, his father comes in. So the action continues to move. Finally, this gentleman is wanting a word with him. It's not the Lord Chancellor this time, and he tells himself to keep quiet, or rather, his father tells him to keep quiet, and says that the man will tell him himself who he is. He's sipping Tokai in the terrace room, so the reader should know who this is, because, of course, it is the decanter of Tokai that opens the golden compass, that poisoned Tokai that Lyra warns her uncle father about to save his life. Um, Again, Malcolm says that he always tells the truth, which might not be exactly like the um, the logic puzzle of the Liar of Crete, but is certainly something like it. And it gets his hair ruffled. So very nice. One of the very few real interactions we see between him and his father here. I can't help but again recall that Pullman himself has similarly very few interactions in his life with his father. Really, his father becomes more of a story than a flesh and blood person to him. Um, and is associated in his mind with this kind of smell of glamour, as he describes it in his autobiographical sketch. Um, so to see this rather earthy, rather um, simple kind of interaction between Malcolm and his father is quite moving, actually. And so here he comes thinking about the Tokai. He's actually tempted to drink it. We can think of Lyra drinking the complicated wines down in the cellars of Jordan College with Roger. Um, and he still has this sense of reality disturbed because of his absorption by that spangled ring that he saw. And when he sees the demon of the man in the terrace room, he thinks that she might be that ring given given form because of the spots on her fur. This is the snow leopard, and the man with his dark saturnine expression recalls as well those heroes that Hannah Relf loves in her detective stories and her mysteries. He's a friend of Hannah Relf, is how he introduces himself, and then gives his name as Asriel. The name doesn't mean much to Malcolm until he clarifies that he's the father of the baby in the priory. Lord Asriel. He tests him with the name of the baby, Lyra, and her demon, Pantalaimon. He, again, remembers that moment when Benedicta faced down the men, and he stands his ground against this imposing figure, Lord Asriel, to require some sort of proof, at least, of his bona fides, and that he is who he says he is. So he isn't sure, but he's going to, again, trust in order to be able to move forward. Tells once more what happened, and describes in a way another foreshadowing that the one man who did show politeness smiled and had a real smile, a genuine smile. This is the kind of thing that we'll see from Bonneville very soon here when he enters the story properly. If you like, from Shakespeare, one can smile and be a villain, a malefactor. But Benedicta was not scared. She faced them off. He can picture, again, that ring in the form of the demon. That's where this comes in, and also compares it to the picture of the Sphinx in his encyclopedia. So again, this mythological basis of symbol pictures then taking on a real, for Lyra's world at least, a real form in demons and in the expressions of others. What's internal can become external, and vice versa. There's a kind of parity between the realms of the material and the imagination. Now, there's some plot elements here that we have to talk about briefly. We get the League of St. Alexander recapitulated. We get the problem that Lord Asriel is banned from seeing his daughter, and so that's why he is here and sneaking around. So legally he's not allowed to see her, and if he's caught, they will move her somewhere else. It sounds like that is part of, anyway, what the CCD men were after, trying to prevent exactly this meeting, it sounds like. Now, the joy of having an ostensible authority is brought up now in the form of the children having their little badges to belong to the order. But along with that, we have the kind of true relationship to authority of Benedicta on the one hand, and then Hannah Relf on the other, the way in which she and Malcolm have a proper teacher-student relationship of the sort that's broken down in his school is represented by the simple fact that she talks to him and lends him books, and they talk about them, right? He's about to say that the nuns take care of Lyra and love her just like he does, but he stops himself and describes how happy she is, how active, how she talks, jabbering to her demon, teaching him to talk. She seems laughing, curious, but she's threatened, of course. And he addresses Lord Asriel as Sir, which he says will do, which is maybe a glance at Pullman's own knighthood. He's now, of course, Sir Philip Pullman. But he is portraying here a father who loves his child so much that he's willing to risk not only himself but really her well-being, which is an interesting conundrum, right? It's a bit of a spin on the idea of the sort of sacrifice that we see most egregiously in Lyra bringing her best friend Roger all the way to the north, only for him to be separated violently from his demon and to open the way for Lord Asriel to go about his dark business. So Lord Asriel, not a malefactor exactly, but certainly not a picture of moral authority truly, the way Benedicta or Hannah Relf is. So he's complicated. The question is simple. Will the nuns listen to Malcolm? She's known them all his life. Will they allow Lord Asriel to see his daughter? And he doesn't think that they will. But there's no refusing this man, as he says. They're going to go right now, and they're going to take this risk. Malcolm feels that it's awful. On the one hand, it's a terrible risk, and yet he's filled with a kind of admiration. So it's a simple admiration, because it's so wicked for these people to try to prevent a man from seeing his daughter. So they go out. They take the canoe because of the problem of the bridge being watched, and the full moon, not spangled so much as a floodlight on the scene. This brightness and this starkness is part of what lends a kind of uncanniness, among other details that we get to this moment. And if I'm remembering right, this is a part that gets excerpted, and either Pullman or someone else has it published before the book is released. And I couldn't find again exactly where that was. But this clearly he thought was one of the stronger and more intriguing, or his publisher did, sections to sort of take out and get people, to whet people's appetite for the book before it had been released. So he feels affronted on behalf of La Belle Sauvage that Lord Asriel was dismissive, didn't expect it to be a real canoe, as he says, so expecting some kind of toy. The man steps aboard as if he has no weight, as if he's a shadow. And this connects clearly with that idea of the ghosts that the chapter opened with. So they go across. As he praises the canoe, it's a good one. This is the one thing that Malcolm is good at, right? Moving silently with making no noise in his boat. Very like Will in a way, who's good at deflecting attention. They come to a place to tie up at a willow branch. Have to think of Shakespeare again with Ophelia and the willow across the brook. There's a gap in the hedge, and it's easier for the boy to pass through. It's harder for the man, but somehow he does it. So again, there's this kind of uncanny ability Asriel has from way back in the Golden Compass, where he was able to sort of call and have things happen and come to him as he expects. Here he can move silently. He can fit through places that he shouldn't really be able to. He is ghost-like in a way, or spiritual. They come to the shutters, and Malcolm counts carefully over. The trees are asleep, and personified in that way, and of course the nuns as well. And so he's very afraid to wake them up, especially dreading if Benedicta should hear him. So he's knocking carefully, and he doesn't want to startle Sister Fenella because of her bad heart. Finally, it's the child who kind of cries out quietly that wakes the nun, that then he can get her attention. He apologizes, but he says her father's here. He's pursued by his enemies. He finds this phrase from somewhere that he's really in earnest. This is a kind of storytelling stock phrase, I take it, or perhaps something that he's heard from someone older. So as much as he's trying to dismiss this as nonsense, that it's a bad thing to ask, so that he's now in the position of the malefactor, doing a bad thing, asking a bad thing, taking a bad risk. This is the point at which Asriel whispers to him and whispers to her something he can't hear, and they talk for a long time. And with amazement, he sees the shutter fully open, the light fall on his face so she can see him. Again, this idea of proving who he is. And then takes the baby with a kind of infinite delicacy. The treatment of children from Asriel veers wildly then between the way he treats Roger and Lyra when she's older, with a kind of callousness, a kind of making them expendable, right, for his purposes, to this infinite delicacy, this moment that he takes every risk in order to experience before he has to go about his strange, dark business. So how did he persuade Sister Fenella? Again, there's the uncanny powers that he is associated with, and not least of those, his powers of persuasion, of seduction, if you want to call it that, his powers of storytelling. As we see, he's even able to get the scholars to fund his journey to the north when they see what he has to show them in the lantern slides. So this is the moment, I think, that kind of the set piece that all this is building up to, of the man strolling slowly in a lordly way, the lord in his domain, with all the silvery night to enjoy, showing the moon to Lyra, or perhaps showing Lyra to the moon. This idea that there is some sort of celestial purpose that is interested in the behaviors of human beings, that the moon, the stars, the planets, as these kind of angelic beings in the classical Judeo-Christian conception of them, are concerned with the affairs of men, right? That in the Psalms words, the men are made little lower than the angels, right? In a way is a reflection on the astonishing sense that we mean something, right? That the world itself has a meaning, and that we are the ones who are responsible to interpret that world. That whatever kinds of consciousness might be out there, we are yearning to communicate with it, but in the same sense, we strive to understand how we ourselves fit into that larger consciousness and what our relationship to it is meant to be. In some sense, this is the return to Eden, right? The Lord in his domain, the Father and the child united, the principle of authority and religion rightly understood, not as a malefactor or a force for evil and oppression, but as a force for cohesion, for harmony, and for the preservation of life in the midst of a world utterly racked with risk and ruin. Of course, this is just the calm before the storm, right? This is literally before the flood is going to wash all of this away in a few chapters. So we're told 3 times that the man makes no sound, that there is no sound to be heard, and then that when the demon lifts her head as if she hears something, even the stones are outlined. This recalls the way that people try to stave off the specters by counting the stones. I think it's Will's mother, actually, who does that in her mental distress. And the specter is, of course, a kind of image of melancholy, as Pullman calls it, or depression, as it would be called clinically, another thing that he himself has experienced, and that he weaves into his story represents with this kind of mythic quality. Um, but there's a statue-like stillness, and this melting, this solvent power is something that will come back in the very conclusion of the series in the Rosefield as the alkahest, this universal solvent. Um, what is it that can take a tableau of this sort, an artistic moment, and break it down and move it forward? Well, it seems like it is the threat, perhaps, that there is no deeper meaning, right? That sense of melancholy is in some way closer to the truth than the sense that we are connected to all of nature and its purposes are in some way related to ours. Um, Again, Asriel's compared to a ghost, right? So perhaps he has no uh, true form, or rather true substance. Um, Perhaps this whole uh, story is just a kind of lie. Um, that would be the true solvent of the universal solvent, the alkahest. Um, but I don't feel like that is persuasive. Um, I think rather that as Asriel hands back the baby, and as Malcolm and he depart, and he watches to see how he moves, he is human. He just has learned or intuited how to move silently. Um, and it's something that Malcolm himself wants to practice. He wants to understand. And I think this might actually come from T.H. White, and I think there's some evidence that that's on Pullman's mind here as well. Um, at the very least, Arthurian stories are, and T.H. White, most famous for his retelling in The Sword and the Stone of the King Arthur story. But there's a passage there where the young Arthur and the man known as Robin Hood in our world, but Robin Wood properly in the story, is moving silently, and Arthur is trying to see how he does it and how they can step through the woods making no sound. So again, this idea that we can learn things that are true about the world from stories, that we can learn things from experience that have the truth and meaning of stories, and that can convey experience as well as feeling to spark others' imagination. I just feel like that's the overarching effect that this has, as much as it's in conversation with and in conflict perhaps with really terrifying kinds of nihilism in an extreme sense. So Asriel's ready to be caught because there's a searchlight and a gas engine, but Malcolm has the idea in that moment, or perhaps he's been thinking all along that he'd do this, to get across and then let Asriel take the canoe, head downriver, and escape from his pursuers. We're told the plan occurs to him in that same moment, but of course the unconscious is always processing things, and I think it's something like that idea of the spangled ring coming to him as he's studying the rivers, and then seeing the demon who looks like the spangled ring, and now the man who needs to get down the river. There's a kind of prefiguration, premonition that's happening there. And we'll see every time that the spangled ring appears to Malcolm that it seems to have some sort of significance for what's about to happen in the story. So once again, he watches impressed at how well Asriel can paddle the canoe, how fast she goes, and the demon with her head like the figure at the prow. So again, this idea of the symbol and the reality. She'd never gone so fast. The Belle Sauvage as the boat, and now the Belle Sauvage as the story, are finally moving faster, moving faster. There's an interesting quote here as well from Kristen Poole in her book about Pullman and the historical imagination. She says, as readers, we don't get sucked into Asriel's emotional vortex as we do Satan's. She's comparing him to Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost. In fact, Asriel remains largely aloof and emotionally removed, and we don't see the world through his eyes. I think I disagree with that in some ways, because um, he is an extremely sympathetic figure in certain moments. Um, and I think this is one of them. One that, along with some of the ways his character drastically changes at the end of the Amber Spyglass, helps to, if not fully redeem, then at least lend depth and interest to his character for readers. So I'll have more from Dr. Poole later on here. It's an amazing book, and I was planning to write a proper review of it, which I hope to finally do here soon. This brings us into chapter 11. So, like I said, it's called it's called Environmental Protection in the UK edition. It's called Three Legs in the US edition. I had that backwards. So there's that name change straightened out. This moves us a few days ahead. So again, thinking about the chronology, we come up to more discussions with his demon about the meaning of this strange half hour, because he has no one else he can talk to, really, because he's busy with the inn, and his parents are. But then they don't notice the canoe's gone. But then he can talk to Dr. Relf, right? And so on Saturday, he gets there later than usual because he has to walk. And so he explains that that he trusted Lord Asriel, as Sister Fenella evidently did, that he's very persuasive, of course. And she, again, a spin on that idea of the malefactor, she tells him that he did the right thing. He certainly knows how to steer a canoe, right? And this is kind of passing into a feel of a murder story now, or a mystery story, because he worries that the Belle Sauvage will come back with bullet holes in her. And instead of a mystery story, this time he gets a true history. He thinks the Silk Road is going to be a murder story, but it's a true history by a modern traveler of that part of the world. And the other book he gets is a book about symbolic pictures. I have theories about which book that might be. Looking around, again, Dr. Poole is guessing, based on publication dates, this is a quote, that Pullman is referring to The Silk Road, A New History, published by Oxford University Press in 2012. And you can find this book. It's by Valerie Hansen. Online, the entire PDF is available, it looks like, or some section of it at least. And then as far as the symbol pictures, it could be a few things. It could be by Withers, the collection of emblemes, ancient and modern, which Pullman references in Poco, an essay included in Demon Voices. I'm getting this via Poole again, from which he discusses the month of May image. It could be Cesare Ripa's Iconologia, which is also referenced. It could be Gombrich, that's Ernst Gombrich, the art historian. It certainly looks like this is a source for the Ripa stuff, because there's an essay called Icones Symbolicae, Philosophies of Symbolism and the Bearing on Art, 1972, though an earlier version appeared in 1948, according to Christopher D. Johnson on a website. And the passage in question there, with interpretation, is Gombrich citing something from yet another person, Abby Warburg, another artist and theorist, has a book called The Builder Atlas of Mnemosyne, so like something like the art atlas of memories. Looks extremely interesting. Looks like the sort of thing Pullman would be interested in. He says in many places that he wishes he had studied art, actually. So it could be Gombrich's book on symbolic images. It's available on archive.org. And the title is simply Symbolic Images in this edition. Um, but the problem with that one is that it's really obviously out of the range of most any 11-year-old reader. But maybe it's something like the way that Pullman first read Milton, not really understanding, but nevertheless being powerfully impacted by the sound of the words and the overall feeling that it conveyed. Um, so there's some really good discussion in Poole about emblem books. Another author, Thomas Browne of the 17th century, and this is a quote, noticed a hyena signified an unstable man, like Gerard Bonneville, the deranged man who pursues baby Lyra, Alice and Malcolm in La Belle Sauvage, and whose demon is in fact a hyena. This is her talking about Valeriano Hieroglyphica, and a work by Singer on Sir Thomas Browne, citing Browne's Pseudodoxia Epidemica. Then there's also George Wither's Emblemes. She goes on, we find an emblem of a squirrel, which survives a flood through its ingenuity, figure 24 in her book. And we are reminded of Sister Benedicta's squirrel demon in La Belle Sauvage. I think that's a misprint for Sister Fenella. Um, as such an influential person in Malcolm Polstead's life, did she pass along the qualities of improvisation that enabled him to navigate his way through the deluge? And the caption on this emblem says, "A little wit may stand instead when strength doth fail in time of need." Um, uh, and this is, again, from that book, A Collection of Emblemes, Ancient and Modern. Um, so, yeah, there's a lot that could go into this little allusion here. Um, I haven't had a chance this time around to read up on all of these books because I'm not sure which ones they are on the one hand, and because there's so many on the other. But I'll include some links anyhow for those who are interested. Now, as Malcolm is reading these books, we don't actually hear about his discussion with Dame Hannah this time. So he seems more interested, though, in the alethiometer itself. We'll get to that, than symbolic pictures and art per se. And he seems more interested in the actual places than the telling of the story in the Silk Road, or the telling of the history, rather. So as we're told, it stretches from Tartary to the Levant, and he realizes he needs a better atlas. So he's going to ask for one for his birthday, so that he can look things up. There's this contrast then between the places that he feels at home, right? That on the one hand, there's the safety, the unlimited generous food that he takes for granted. There's all that at the Trout, right? His mother, his father. There's the Priory and its security, even able to stand up to other elements of the church. But then there's the sense that even that is going to be encircled by danger, that Asriel narrowly escaped, and of course they themselves are going to narrowly escape very soon because there's danger all around. So this brings us to Sunday. We're told that the rain has continued and the level of the water keeps rising. We're seeing this from Dame Hannah's perspective now, that Port Meadow is invisible under the water, and you can sort of feel or imagine it flowing inexorably forward over the city of Oxford. This is given that that feeling of bleakness, of depression, again, that seems to be a major thread here. While she studies and has coffee, she sees this van that's unmarked, but says official in every um, line of its appearance, that spurs her to try to go past. Just like when in Lyra's Oxford, Lyra comes upon the street, Juxon Street, and notices that something is wrong, and Pan again, in that case, whispers to her, just as Hannah's demon here whispers. Jasper tells her to keep walking. Um, so she's thinking to herself what she could do if she gets caught. It sounds like the habeas corpus protection has been suspended. And there's a kind of ironic mention of this idea of the protectors of English liberty. I think this is a uh, article that Pullman writes, at least one, around this time, in which he's satirizing the politicians of his day. But there's probably another reference that's there. Um, so she could be held without a warrant for no charge because of the way that these shadowy powers are jockeying for power. They're fiercely rivalrous, we're told. So Oakley Street on the one hand and the CCD on the other. Although she knows so many important people, including lawyers, she wants to seem unafraid, but clearly she is feeling threatened as well. So the men say they're from environmental protection. Their demons are Robin and Otter, so an airy and then a watery sort of being. They point out that the sandbags she's placed are leaking. There's water getting through, and they examine that gap, and they call her Miss. She notes that they're very polite now. All of a sudden, it's never confirmed whether the old man next door is really gone, staying with his daughter. It's never confirmed whether these two are really from environmental protection or whether they are undercover and onto her. But they do put up some sandbags. They never occur in the story. We never get more about this. But it comes back to this idea that her back door had been broken into. There's a bit more about this kind of cloak and dagger stuff as well shortly. Meanwhile, we get a scene with Malcolm and Sister Fenella, I think one of the last, if not the last of this sort, where she's being unusually stubborn. This is Thursday, so later in the week. It's been some days since that strange evening, but clearly she is still feeling, well, either embarrassed or resentful because she's not acknowledging his questions. She's stubbornly not answering. There's a discussion here of the apples that are going into the pies. The nuns sell the good ones and they keep the worst for themselves, and yet the pies still taste just as good. They still generously keep a slice for him most of the time. And again, this is like one of the last images we see in Lyra's Oxford, this pie that is there for her when she gets back from her adventure. It's the sort of thing, again, that happens at the end of I Was a Rat. One of Pullman's favorite images, it seems like, and not that different from the way that even Tolkien's great epic concludes on a note of domesticity, really, with Sam returning home to his family. But this is where we get the T.H. White thing again, because they're talking about what might have happened to Mr. Boatwright. Presumably he's hiding in the woods, he must be disguised. And again, this idea that it would be easier for children to hide than for an adult brings them to the question of what sort of games Malcolm plays. The squirrel is given a name here, and it is Sister Fenella's demon that's the squirrel. And his name is Geraint, or Geraint, one of the knights of King Arthur, right? And the kinds of games that Sister Fenella used to play when she was a kid, because that's the first version of the question, actually. It's Malcolm finally getting her to come out of her shell a bit by asking her what she did as a child. She used to play King Arthur, and she would pull the sword out of the stone. And she retells the story, and she demonstrates it with a knife in the dough. Um, so she pantomimes this vast effort, um, and gives this majestic frown. Um, when Malcolm does it, his demon becomes a monkey to try to help. Um, and so there's this contrast between the effort that others have to expend and the carelessness of Arthur himself, right? Um, the boy, as a boy, he thinks, oh, I'll just take that one, right? And just like that, she pulls it out and is revealed to be the king all along. So this is contrasted with the fact that she would never got to be Arthur in the games. She was some lowly squire, right? Just like the end of the Prufrock poem. Um, and then she only got to be Arthur when she played by herself with her demon. And then she turns the question back to Malcolm. What does he do for fun? He plays exploring games, Lost Civilizations, going up the Amazon in his canoe. This is very like the kinds of games that Will plays, imagining rescuing his father and vice versa in the Subtle Knife. And this is where it comes to his lending the boat to Asriel, and this silences the conversation, cuts it off. She says he must have been very grateful, and her tone was as close to severe as it ever got. So then, again, Asta and Malcolm, they're thinking she must be embarrassed, even ashamed of what she did. She must have confessed to Sister Benedicta, and perhaps they'll even keep her from taking care of Lyra anymore. So as he's leaving, there's no light in the workshop. Mr. Taphouse is gone. It's dusk, it's dark from all the rain, and he sees a shadow like a man. So this kind of inversion of the way in which Asriel looks and moves like a shadow with no weight. Now we see a shadow like a man. And indeed, this character will be a sort of alter ego for Asriel throughout the rest of the story. On the path that's clear in the moonlight, he can see this lurching, limping, this thing like a large dog. It turns out to be a demon they can recognize. Of course, demons can recognize demons. It's the hyena with 3 legs. And it pisses in the middle of the path. I don't think this is very likely, but there is something like this that happens towards the end of the very strange Esperpento or grotesque play of Valle Inclán, Lights of Bohemia, a dog pissing in the middle of the stage. I don't know. Again, I don't think that Pullman got it from there, but I think that it's possible. And it's an interesting coincidence that I happened to be reading that book recently for the first time and ran across that. I thought immediately of this moment. It lopes clumsily away. There's this wave of malevolence that comes off it, even though it's maimed. And then they run inside to tell the nuns to be careful because there's someone there who shouldn't be there. And he can't bring himself to tell Benedicta the part about the demon peeing in the path. And yet he does tell her about the hyena demon with 3 legs. This is kind of like how Fenella barged in breathless at the start of the chapter 10. Now it's Malcolm barging in breathless, and he tries to tell his story, but again leaves out some part of it that is too full of hatred and contempt, and it makes him feel soiled, makes him feel belittled. There's a definite tinge here of the innocence in experience, a theme starting to come in. But again, it's about something he sees. It's this vision that the emphasis is on, and his inability to tell it. So he's come back to warn them, even though he's afraid. That was a good deed, she says. So again, the opposite of the malefactor. She tells him to be careful. She places a hand on his shoulder. It's the first time she's ever reached out and touched him, he notices. And she says that one hears all sorts of things, and the question is whether or not they matter, when he asks if she's ever heard of such a maimed demon. But he doesn't want to frighten Fenella. And again, Benedicta is putting on a show, if not actually feeling that deep confidence that she seems to represent. The child is safe, sleeping, and she'll watch out for him. She'll uh, keep an eye on him, and so as he says, he doesn't know what she'd actually do if the man tried something or the demon did, but he feels protected nonetheless. He feels protected by her attention, and he finally makes it home, tumbles into the kitchen. Um, the chapter closes with a moment that could be the end, a kind of cliffhanger moment of him seeing the man at the bar. But instead, it continues for just a little bit longer here. And we get not only the tavern scene, but another scene where he's discussing this with Hannah Relf. So, what happens at the tavern? His mother says sarcastically, is on the roof signaling to Mars. Where does she think she is? He's at the bar. He's working. So again, this idea of signaling to the moon, signaling to Mars in a playful key. But it's deadly serious. It's quiet in the bar. The drinkers who normally are at the bar have moved far away. They all seem disgusted. Even his father looks weary and helpless, full of loathing, but gives a forced smile when the man turns. The demon clacks these yellow teeth. She's astonishingly ugly. There's this thought that whoever she was fighting when she was wounded must have suffered, or would have suffered if those jaws met in their flesh. So the direct allusion there to the battle that we saw, the fight between Fardacorum and this man Bonneville and his demon. But by having his demon turn into a ladybird, as it says in the UK, or ladybug in the American English, it can conceal the direction she's looking. So sort of the opposite of the owl, but nevertheless this kind of surreptitious attention. And you can't help but notice that the man looks friendly, like he's interested in something you're telling him, and you're telling him something he wants to know. So again, he has a genuine smile, just like the man who came in to the Priory demanding Lyra, the one who was in charge of the Office of Child Protection. And he thinks to himself that he ought to write this down to tell Hannah Relf, and indeed he tells her in almost those same words. In the next scene, he tells his mother, again, what just happened at the Priory, but leaves out what the demon had done. He can't tell that part, and he can only tell that to Hannah Relf for some reason. What she gives is instructions and thinks of them as explanations. So again, a kind of failure on the part of the teacher, in this case, the parent. They think about the problem then of such a person coming into the bar, right? She thinks in a very practical sense, well, it means that nobody's going to come, right? They won't need Alice anytime. She's been sent home for the evening because there's so little to do, because there's no customers. They're all keeping away, and so her solution is just for her husband to tell the man to go away, right? To stay away. Meanwhile, she just tells Malcolm to go do his homework, and his own demon turns into a squirrel. So again, this kind of chain of connections between the emblem of the squirrel and the flood, the squirrel demon, and the stories of King Arthur, in this cozy image of a meal of cauliflower cheese with custard to cool his mouth after he burns it. They reflect that everyone seems to know what this man has done, except they're the only ones who don't seem to know. And this is when they get this direct eye contact, this wink, and the smile. The man's face is described as a clear, well-lit photogram. So again, that allusion to the images that Asriel shows, or this kind of foil for Asriel. He has a vigor and a rough mischief that the word handsome doesn't quite describe. This wink communicates this feeling of conspiracy against the world, of acquaintance that is shared knowledge, right? We know a thing or two. and he's called a complicated, attractive face. Um, so they think of it as a kind of puzzle for the alethiometer when he's talking to Hannah Rolfe about this. He could have been a criminal. He couldn't remember what he was wearing, but something dark. Um, he might have been a spy, but this demon's too obvious, right? They don't think about the fact that this just happened because she's clearly still licking at the wound. It's fresh. Um, there's a sense in which this whole interaction and the demon himself, herself, could be thought of as a kind of symbol. Um, so what would that symbolize then is the way they proceed. Well, contempt again for people, for Malcolm personally and for the place and for the nuns and all that they represent. The demon is a scavenger, uh, consuming carrion. And so as Malcolm points out, it's disgusting but also useful, right? And its laugh is a kind of hypocrisy, an image like the crocodile tears. So again, a Hamlet image there. Um, but they especially are confused by the kindness in the man's smile, that it wasn't creepy but happy, and his contrast with the demon, which is awful. Um, so we're told a little bit of a clue about the timing here. Um, the fact that what he saw the day before yesterday um, made him not uh, sympathetic, but rather glad that she was wounded. So this feeling that um, somehow um, what he gets from the book, the one about symbolic pictures, is just, although it was very difficult, that things can stand for other things. And that's enough for them to go on, because she gives the example of uh, a question about whether things, those meanings, are discovered, that is, they really exist, and people interpret them uh, in accordance with their true nature, discovered, or whether they're made up, whether we are imagining and just coming up with things, associations that aren't really there. Her example to help talk this through is the theorem of Pythagoras, which Malcolm gives the statement of. Again, this is a little bit advanced for an 11-year-old probably, but he correctly states Pythagoras' theorem about the square on the hypotenuse being equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. The way he's able to say that in his own words either means that he has had it drilled into him, or he's actually internalized. And this is a little bit like the question of discovering versus making things up. So the mathematical example is really interesting here. Um, so she wants to think about whether that was true before it was first stated. So not invented, but discovered. And he sort of agrees. And then they move to the example of the hive surrounded by bees. Its primary meanings are sweetness and light. Now this has a poetry reference buried in it as well. I think it's Pope who talks about sweetness and light. I could be wrong there. Um, and then they try to come up with other images that could represent those same concepts. So they come up with honey, or rather sugar. They're trying to see, why does this represent it? Okay, so sweetness from the honey of the bees and light from the candles made of the beeswax. Now, again, the question is, was this association already there, or was it invented? The problem is that in this case, there's no mathematical proof to be given. So could just anything symbolize sweetness and light? Could it be a sword? Again, sword in the stone, King Arthur. Could it be a dolphin? So the idea of the watery being, the thing that can survive in the flood. The playful being as well. Well, there's no natural connection in that case, he says. So it seems like they might have discovered the relationship between the image of the bees and those concepts, right? It's not so much of a stretch. But in a world where there is no Pythagoras, while this theorem holds true, does a world where there are people but no bees have such a natural connection, right? It's not quite the same. Again, they would find something else, perhaps sugar. This is where they start to think about other ways to represent the same concepts. Perhaps the sun for the light piece. Now, in his working through this series of steps, Malcolm starts to see that while the connection still exists, the the association is here in our minds, as he says, but not there in the hypothetical world with bees and no people. Right? We, standing outside, imagining it, can see that the connection is still there, but of course, there's no one there in the thought experiment to perceive it. So, as he says, it's a bit invented because it might as well not be there. And he compares it to the quantum, the way that we as observers are mixed up in the things that we're observing. So going back to a previous book that he evidently did read and understood a bit better, although I would say that one was still pretty hard for an 11-year-old to get through. So again, there's this association of the space in which this conversation is happening itself, the safety of the kitchen contrasted with this kind of safety, a safety of thinking and understanding and of seeing and feeling how big the world is. He asks her, was that work that they were just doing? She said she thinks it was, right? He would only say that to Asta, though, that thought, that intuition that he has about the kinds of safety. And I think, again, that the way in which Pullman presents this seems like a pretty close to a kind of conception of his ideal type of education, a kind of tutorial in which the parties are actually interested and actually feel a kind of connection to their subject matter. Again, probably not in the way that he actually felt about his studies at Oxford, because he didn't have a very good experience there. And yet it's a kind of reimagining of that, transposed into the fictional setting, highly contrived, between this young boy and this scholar of history of ideas. So if we allow all that, and then we can then bring in the alethiometer itself, just for a moment here, we get the problem immediately that she doesn't have access to the alethiometer, so he can't actually see it. But he's interested in it, and so she gives him a picture of it that seems to correspond closely to one that was made for promotional purposes. Again, Gabriel Schenk has an actual copy of it. You can find copies online as well. And it has the picture of the 36 symbols around with its divisions. That, she says, there's a memory trick to learn them all, and she's memorized and internalized them, and he can learn them too. She'll show him that memory trick another time. Presumably she's talking about something like the memory palaces that Frances Yates writes about in her books that so fired Pullman's imagination around the time he was in Oxford, Exeter College, that is. But she suggests for now that Malcolm just choose one of these symbols and think about it and what associations it brings to mind for him. So it's a kind of first step towards understanding it, to engage and motivate him. But the image itself with the circle and the divisions makes him think not of geometry now, but of the spangled ring that he saw. And so he tells her about that as well. And she becomes interested, even though it was only in his mind. She says it's something she has heard of, a migraine aura. Now, as we'll see in the next chapter, he mishears this and misremembers, although Asta's closer to the word aura. he mishears this as aurora. So yet another case where an image or a word is misapprehended and associated with something else that is nevertheless related to and important for the story as a whole. So these kind of happy accidents that Pullman is contriving for his characters. She's the one who brings up that it can be accompanied by headache, but again, he didn't have that. And then very briefly, they talk about the Silk Road book. All he says is it's the place he wants to go most in the world. And then she says perhaps he will one day. Of course, he will in the subsequent books of the Book of Dust, volumes that is. The chapter does finally close then after that false cliffhanger with the statement that it's a single sentence in its own paragraph. That evening, someone brought La Belle Sauvage back. So the action is continuous here because that evening is what gets narrated next in chapter 12. But just because we've been going so long and because I haven't made as much notes on that chapter as I'd really like to, I'm going to continue my practice here of just keeping the divisions 2 chapters at a time. So again, we're picking up the pace. We're seeing some interesting shifts in the structure of the story, where what before was a lot of setting things up and getting the pieces on the board, now we're starting to make some moves and we're starting to pick up the pace. The action is going to be continuous for quite a little while here, I believe. And it is going to bring us to that flood which has been promised since the cover of the book. And again, the movements of the ocean, the tides related to the moon, the aurora of celestial light that starts the golden compass off being related to the aura of the spangled ring that he sees in his mind, right? These connections between the terrestrial, including the aqueous, and the celestial are going to ramp up the introduction of this idea of spiritual evil is going to be developed in much more complicated ways. And the human malefactors will find their true, truly fearsome evolution in a kind of spiritual evil that they partake of in Bonneville himself. This kind of alter ego of Asriel that will pursue them throughout the flood and the rest of the story. So that story that Alice alludes to there about the Office of Child Protection being bastards, that is never told. And whatever thread of idea that is picking up on for Pullman himself, again, his relationship with his own family or with other families as he was growing up, those are not brought into the open in any place that I know of. But even without that, there's abundant references here. I hope that they are ones that I'll be able to track down and include some links for to accompany this episode in the description. I'll just say for a couple more to look to besides the poem itself about the Spangled Moon and her sisters, the books of symbolic pictures and the Silk Road, the Atlas, this playing of King Arthur, which I think is more T.H. White than Fairy Queen, but of course Fairy Queen is the epigraph at the end of the book, and of course the sweetness and light quote. There's also this idea that the author has responsibility to the story as a kind of orphan that is brought to us. It's a little wisp of a thing, as he describes it in his conversation with Mary Beard he talks about this, and also in his essay Magic Carpets in Demon Voices. Again, this is kind of the initial image in I Was a Rat, his retelling of the Cinderella fairy tale. Um, and I really think that there's something about his art, his ars poetica, right? His storytelling and his view of the function of storytelling for education that is continually being brought to the foreground here. Um, that I think really powerfully redeems those chapters about the schools insofar as they are contrasted with the much more interesting kind of storytelling that happens in these chapters. And from here on out, I think the book just really picks up. So, again, I want to set the record straight from that last episode. And hopefully I'll be able to put out a few more before too long here to keep us moving along at a good pace as well. So thank you again for listening, and I hope that you take care until the next time.